Well, perhaps if I could start off just by asking about one of these forces for transformation, which is the digital economy. And we heard from Tony about how this being a real positive across the whole economy, not just the tech sector, but also the possibility that many people, many businesses in the regions who can't access, for reasons of income or for where they are, can't be part of that economy. So I guess my questions are to Tony and to Sue to start with. How much risk do you think there is in some people, organisations being left behind as we undergo this really important transformation?
Look, that's a really, I think, quite an important question, because if you do believe that digital is where more and more of, economic, social, political transactions are occurring, if people are unable to access that either because of a coverage issue, which is the sort of regional point, or, and Sue will have more to say on this, I suspect, if it's to do with an income or affordability point, that's a very, very big problem. And so I think Australia has been relatively good at ensuring democracy of access, but it's one that's really, really, we're chasing a moving target here. The expectations, the demands, the necessity that people want changes quite quickly. We are either, it depends on how you measure it, either number one or number two in the world in terms of smartphone penetration. So it's either us or South Korea. So a lot of Australians have access to this technology in a way that almost no other country on the planet has, but it doesn't mean that there aren't people at the margin who are not. And I think both the policies of successive governments now in terms of providing greater access to the technology, in terms of coverage, but also in terms of how we, particularly in the private sector, make sure that there's products for low-income people in particular, is a really big part of my life, and I think something that we need to keep pushing on, because there's no doubt if you don't have one of these things, you're increasingly missing out on a large amount of what's going on in society.
Thank you, Tony. And Sue?
Just three insights. Obviously, one is about income. If you haven't got enough money, you can't actually run a phone or have some sort of connection through computers into the ICT world. And that, I think, is going to be resolved by, as the market is nuanced and as we work with providers and as we come up with smart solutions, I'm fairly confident that we will actually be able to deal with that to some degree, hopefully enough to keep people connected. But I think there's two other issues that we have not yet factored into our thinking. One of them is that our population is ageing. 3% of people will live to over 100. We have a vast majority of people living, expecting to live into their late 70s and early 80s. I don't know about you, but my ICT connection and my knowledge about ICT comes from the fact that I'm in the workforce. If I wasn't in the workforce, I'm not quite sure how I would stay connected. So I think that's a sleeper in this connection issue. And it's a particularly important sleeper because some of our human service systems have already switched over to being ICT connected. So if you are on a Centrelink payment, you have to have ICT connection, otherwise you don't get payment. Which leads me to the third thing, and that is we find it very difficult to shift our thinking. I cannot tell you how many times people tell me that all these homeless people with all these smartphones, surely they could do better. Well, I've got to tell you, if you're homeless, the one thing that keeps you connected to the world is actually having your mobile phone and being able to stay connected with payment systems, but more importantly about information. You need to know where to go and you need to be able to do it in a cost-effective way. So I think that change in attitude for all of us understanding what this digital disruption is doing to the way in which our community works, I think we will actually see some positive changes once we start thinking that way.
Yes.
Sorry. Just 2 points on that. The first thing is we run a wonderful program called Connected Seniors, and the beauty of it is you use essentially high school kids to train elderly people how to use technology. And if you ever get a chance to have a look at it, it's the most wonderful experience, because it's about human connection as much as education. But it's an important point that you raise, so the ageing of the population. And look, more and more people have that skills and bringing it in, but because the skill set's changing so quickly, that's really important. The second point, and it's to Sue's last point about the importance of these devices for homeless people. I met a woman in a shelter in Melbourne who had triple O plugged. She used to, when she slept on the streets, had 000 plugged into a phone ready to dial. This stuff is not just for them to connection; it's for their safety. It's really, really crucial. And one of the things that we do a lot of is providing, sort of SIM cards, prepaid, etc., to experts to give out to those people, because they need this lifeline very much.
Thank you. We have a question from the audience.
Hi everyone, Alana Josky from CEDA. Thank you all for your presentations. My question is to Peter. I loved your commentary on the federal government and the upcoming election, but the state elections also are in a year away. So I wanted to know if you had some insights into the state politics. Thank you.
Quickly get this in before Mike Nahan arrives. It's probably standing at the back of the room. I tend to think that it's going to be a tough election for the Liberal Party to win, or the coalition, not that that's technically what they are over here, of course. I sort of say that as much as anything because of going for a third term and not really having a renewal plan in terms of leadership, or not seeming to have much of a renewal plan in terms of leadership. Colin Barnett, I do think that he has now got a little bit of the sort of Paul Keating, you don't have to like him, but you've got to respect him. But that's harder to get away with the size of the debt and the economic problems that the state faces, irrespective of whether you specifically do or don't blame the government for that. So I think that the combination of the time that they've been in, as well as the difficulties that they have in terms of some of their sort of personnel, will be a problem for them. And I don't see the size of their majority being a factor. I think for a long time in modern politics, those two words almost don't go together, but for a long time in state contests as well as federally, you sort of hear this idea that they've got enough of a buffer to survive. I think when the electorate moves now in a de-aligned voter environment, the electorate really moves. And I tend to think that when you then look at Labor and you look at Mark McGowan and you look at Ben Wyatt, I do think that they've got a team that is electable. And I think in Ben Wyatt, there's a lot of potential to go with that. And there are others in their lineup as well. So if I had to pick, with my stunning track record of picking winners, I would, and so Labor probably doesn't want this endorsement, but I tend to think that they're the favourites in this election, because I don't accept that the once upon a time theory that you could sandbag key seats will be enough for the Barnett government.
Thank you, Peter. We have a question over here.
Hello, I'm Andrea Gleeson from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. I'd like to thank all the presenters for their excellent and very interesting presentations. If I may ask two quick questions. Mark, firstly, I was really appreciative of the positive note in which you ended your talk. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little on opportunities for the Western Australian economy to diversify and to go into new markets. And Peter, I was interested in your views on, given the dilemma of modern politics of possibly extending federal government election term 3 to 4 years, something like that.
Mark, would you mind taking that first?
Okay. So I understood the question to be opportunities in the West Australian...
Opportunities for the West Australian economy, the new areas that the economy might diversify into, drawing on some of its strengths.
Well, it's a good question. someone made the comment the other day that it was in this ballroom, that they don't like the word diversification, they like the word broadening. That resonated with me. I think one thing we have to establish is that we turn around and say, we're too concentrated on natural resources. We're a natural resource hub. Houston is a oil and gas hub. London and New York are financial centres. There is a way to think and say, just be grateful that we actually are relevant in a very large industry in one way, and we've developed expertise that actually makes us probably not world class, it makes us best in class. We export technology in natural resources from here. We are a leader in virtually every field. You go to the far-flung places of the world, and in energy, oil, gas, mining and metals, who pops up? West Australians. Australians, but half of those would be West Australians. So I'd probably start by saying, we're going to have a long history and a long future in natural resources. It will come back, quite frankly, even that is an oxymoron, because we have a larger economy now in those areas than we did 5-10 years ago. I mean, the other areas for us are education, agriculture. Agriculture has clearly stepped forward in this state. I'm still very much a believer that in education, and I notice that the Vice-Chancellor of UWA is in the room, we have an ability with world-class universities to export both secondary education and also tertiary education. So, they are clearly areas of our economy. I do think that that you do have to hold your nettle at times like this, and you really do need to not necessarily see the future as too bleak, because one thing that is happening here, which everyone would notice, is cost deflation. Now, be careful with that, because you would wake up 4 or 5 years ago and the only conversations you would have is how expensive is a cup of coffee in Perth. And the comments were that inflation was too high. It probably was. It was probably at some point 6 to 8%. The data says it's at 1%. My own view is that we're probably in a period of deflation at the moment. We will emerge out of this a far more competitive city and state. Our microeconomics will mean that we are more cost competitive, we are more efficient. Yes, we will have experienced some pain. It's a bit like medicine. You don't like taking it, but as a patient, you are better at the end of having taken it than you were at the beginning. So microeconomic reform will happen. I think in areas like education and agriculture, we will emerge. Tourism is probably the other one. And the numbers are starting to show that, which is wonderful. But we have a lot of other industries that will do well here. It is not all about natural resources. I do think, though, that is going to be the stronghold of the state for a long period to come. And I'd make my last comment, which is, West Australians are uniquely entrepreneurial in a way that I don't think we recognise. We naturally have to reinvent ourselves. We don't have the luxury of some of the infrastructure that's provided to a Sydney or a London or a New York. And that does breed ingenuity. You just have to be confident in it and actually turn around and say, we've been there before, we will get by it, but it does breed it. And, I think we're seeing the seeds of it occur today. So, I'm not wanting to promote either a good news or bad news story. I'm actually trying to articulate the way I see it. And if you go east, the view of most of the east on Western Australia at the moment is that, it is a very, very dark storm. I think, quite frankly, that is now starting to become a somewhat historical view. Peter's right, mentioned it. We have a debt issue that can be manageable, by the way, but we are going to need some major privatisation to occur for that to happen. And we don't have too many assets, by the way, that are worth $10 to $15 billion. There's one, Western Power, but there aren't that many of that quantum that materially correct our balance sheet. So we are going to have to do some things which, don't resonate with the public and be brave. But otherwise, I think there are lots of opportunities, and quite frankly, this is the time to seed opportunity and not at the top of the market.
Thank you, Mark.
Is that on? Yep. Can I just start by thanking Mark for raising what I said about debt just as the Treasurer walks in? I've got some very... can I just also very quickly echo the sort of the in-the-zone principles of educational export opportunities in WA, the time zone with Asia and the growth throughout Asia. That is, I think, a huge thing for WA for what it's worth. And I'm not just saying that because Mark's alerted me to the fact that my Vice-Chancellor is in the room. But on the question of terms of Parliament, whether they should go from 3 to 4 years or indeed whether they should be fixed or variable, I find this a fascinating topic, but I suspect other than the questioner, I might be the only one in the room, so I'll be very quick. I tend to think that the best option is fixed and 3 year. Unfortunately, we have variable 3 years at the federal level, and in most states, either in reality or in practice, we have fixed 4 years. The problem with fixed 4 years is that if they're not a very good government, it takes a long time before you can get rid of them. And the problem with variable 3 years is that you then lose one of those 3 years to speculation about whether the election will be called earlier. So I would prefer, personally, fixed 3 years. I feel like complacency can set in after 4, or you can't get rid of a bad government. But equally, I think that having a variable election means that there's too much game playing that can get in the road, unless, for example, you need a DD or something like that. And then I could imagine, you obviously need to have that flexibility.
I think all of our speakers today said, look, there are challenges. Some areas seem to be very challenged, but the glass is half full, and there are a lot of opportunities. The question is, if you like, how do we lean into change? And change and innovation are a given, but I think all of our speakers have sort of looked below that and said, okay, what does innovation look like? What sort of change do we need? Where do we need to change? Who needs to be helped through the change is a very important part of this as well. So as I reflect on all of these speakers, I think the opportunities are there, but we need to be very targeted, and there are pitfalls. I was quite taken with the talk from Sue about, okay, we've had this era of labour flexibility, but it's not just the working poor who are challenged by this. The professional classes are also challenged by this. So we need to really rethink our strategies as businesses, our policies as government, and how we support all of us through this period of volatility and change that Mark clearly identifies. We can't change the pace of change. As Tony says, we better get on our surfboards, although Peter says at the moment in politics we seem to be on a boogie board. So, obviously there's some reform that's needed there as well. So I'd like to conclude by thanking all of our speakers. I have some small gifts from CEDA and the sponsors, and then I'll invite Alana to come up. Thank you.